live events going on over the last couple of days, both here on YouTube and on TikTok and over on Instagram. Today, we're going to be starting the very, very basic process of winterizing your roses. Now, if you haven't already watched the full video, it's available for you to watch here on YouTube at any time, or you can catch it on Instagram, you can catch it on YouTube, whichever particular channel you prefer to use. The winterization process when it comes to roses is really very, very basic. Here in the UK, our weather is very, very mild, but we do suffer at this time of year with an awful lot of wind and an awful lot of wind-driven rain. So we do need to take some basic precautions. If you are, however, growing in a growing zone below ours here, and you're growing in growing zones, maybe for instance 4, 5, 6, and 7, you want to be taking some more precautions, and that will involve you actually not only doing this particular process, which you're going to be doing today, but also heaping up mulch or leaf mold or spent compost around the bases of your plants, or bringing your potted plants into a protection of a lee of a building, just to take a little bit of the worst of the weather away from them and protect them from the cold, cold winter winds. Today, I'm going to be popping on my gloves, but we have Elizabeth behind me. She's a pot-grown plant here in the garden at North Lodge, and I'm going to be removing around a third of the growth. We do that to stop the plant rocking around in the winter winds. Obviously, at the moment, it's carrying quite a lot of foliage. There are 1 or 2 flower buds still remaining, but I also want to remove any foliage at this particular point in time that is carrying any harmful pathogens or disease problems. If you've had black spot, mould or mildew in the garden at this time during the 2024 season, now is the perfect time to make sure you get out and you remove all of that foliage from the garden. It needs to be removed and either be incinerated, or it needs to go off for commercial recycling so it doesn't actually reinfect the plant next year. 2024 has been a dreadful year for mould, black spot and mildew in the garden, especially here in the UK, where we've had this horrible, very, very cold and wet summer. Evening temperatures have been right down at about 7, 8, 9 degrees every single night. We've had loads and loads of rain. It's been raining pretty much every single week, with only a couple of warm days dotted here and there through the entire summer. So black spot, mould and mildew have been absolutely rife in the garden this year. So we want to make sure that we're collecting up all of those leaves. First of all, I'm going to pop on my gloves. It's not something I normally wear where I'm gardening, but this particular plant has some supports in it, and I'm going to need to remove those supports to be able to do this little bit of light pruning. So first of all, I'm just going to remove the supports. It's a basic wigwam of hazel canes. Please excuse me while I turn my back to you, and I've popped the gloves on because I'm going to be pulling the canes upwards, and this particular rose does have quite a lot of thorns. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to very, very carefully remove this plant from its support. So I'm just severing the hessian twine which I've put into the plant, removing the hazel canes one by one, being careful with these, because what you don't want to do, you don't want to pull these up and catch yourself on the plant as you do. I'm just going to get rid of those. Again, those are now spent, they're done and dusted. They will go off for commercial recycling now as well. So we're going to get those out of the way. Being careful, say this is a rose, so you do need to be careful. It does have obviously thorns. Going to get rid of all of the 4 canes completely. And then we are left, we can now see our plant and what is left. And at this stage, just to say, what we want to do is remove around a third of the growth, no more. Especially if you're growing in a cold growing zone. You could get away with removing a third to around half at this point, but no more than that. You don't want to be doing any hard pruning until the sap is down and the plant has experienced some really cold winter weather. And I won't advise you do any pruning until we're well past Christmas, maybe to the end of February, very beginning of March, sometimes even the very beginning of April, depending on your growing zone and where you're growing. You never ever want to remove too much growth too quickly. If you leave it on, the plant will tell you where it wants to be pruned to, and removing the growth any further than that can cause you really, really bad dieback problems. And often people that say, oh, my roses died, have pruned them far too early, the frost has got into them and killed them dead. So you want to leave as much growth on them as possible at this time of year, but we want to remove around a third to stop the plant rocking around in the wind. So all we're going to do at the moment, we're going to get rid of the weight. First of all, I'm not paying any attention at this stage to how much I'm removing or where I'm cutting to. I'm just going to simply get rid of the weight so I can actually see the bare bones of the plant, and any stems that have been damaged I can remove at this stage as well. I'm just going to take those back and tidy those back and get rid of them out of the way. And this is going to remove quite a lot of the foliage at this particular point in time as well. Then once I've actually removed a lot of the untidy growth, I can then go through them and just shorten the growth back to around removing around 1/3 of the growth. And at this particular point in time, hopefully that will remove an awful lot of this foliage. If you're particularly good like me, you can make sure your pruning's from an outward facing bud. That just encourages good pruning techniques. At the moment, make sure that you're keeping your secateurs clean. You want to make sure that you've got a rag soaked in Zoflora or bleach, depending on which you want to use, or disinfectant to hand. You certainly don't want to be going between plants and actually reinfecting your plants with dirty secateurs. You also want to be making sure that you're sharpening these at a regular time as well, to make sure these are really razor sharp and they're not crushing the stems. Personally, for me, it's always the Falco number 8. I've got really quite large hands, so these fit for me really well. If you can find a garden centre or a DIY store that actually has a display of secateurs for you actually to handle, I would always advise you find the ones, or a trade show, for instance, Hampton Court or Chelsea, wherever the trade shows that you go to. Make sure they fit your hand and they're comfortable, because this is something you're going to be using an awful lot. So make sure you keep them clean, make sure you keep them dry, make sure you keep them well oiled and sharpened. So at this particular point now, all we're going to do is remove the other growth. You can see that I've removed the weight, and then I'm simply going to go over the plant and get rid of around 1/3 of the growth, taking it back, because I like to do this as a natural process, removing around 1/3 to an outward facing bud. You can see I'm removing an awful lot of the foliage. Keep yourself tidy at this point as well. Keep a bucket like this to hand, or a wheelbarrow. You don't want to be throwing this on the floor, because at the moment, in a minute, you're going to have to pick it all up. So always pop it somewhere tidy, whether you have one of those sheets, but always pop it in a bucket and keep it all tidy, because you don't really want to be going over and picking up. It's all horrible and spiky. So we're just now going to remove the rest of this growth down to around 1/3 and remove as much foliage as possible at this stage, especially if you've had any pest and disease problems in the garden, any black spot, mould or mildew. This is a really good time of year to be getting rid of any of that foliage that is carrying pathogens for next season. Excuse me while I just turn myself so you can still see what I'm doing. Just removing the excess growth by 1/3 at this stage, no more. A little bit tangled up in a clematis here, but that's no problem at all. I am then going to quickly move the camera so you can see what I'm doing. You can see this plant has still got some leaves left on it, but most of the foliage has now fallen. Right, back to you. Let's bring you in so you can see what I'm doing. All I'm going to do now, please excuse me, this is always a bit untidy when you're working live, but I'm going to bring the camera down so you can see what I'm doing. Which one is it? It's that one there. I'm going to drop that down there, and the next stage is to go over and pick up any fallen leaves that are on the surface of the soil. Now, obviously, this particular plant is in a pot, so it's quite easy to do, but all of this foliage here that you see, this needs to go in the incinerator or go off for commercial recycling. A little bit of black spot on this particular plant this year, but we want to make sure that we're not carrying those pathogens over for next year, and we certainly want to make sure that we are not sealing that underneath the mulch that we put in place come January or February. But just getting rid of any fallen leaves there. This stage is a little bit fiddly, a little bit picky. You want to make sure you keep your gloves on for this stage, but you do want to make sure that you're removing any fallen leaves at this stage and getting rid of them, because we don't want to carry pest and disease problems with us for next year. For those of you just joining us, don't forget this particular full tutorial is available for you to watch anytime here on YouTube, or you can catch it on TikTok, you can catch it on Instagram, whichever is best for you. It explains the full process, especially if you're in a colder growing zone, you're in here in the UK. But now all of those leaves are removed. So it's a little bit fiddly, it looks a bit OTT, but I assure you it is something that's very important that you do at this stage. Just remove all of those leaves. You can see there was a little bit of black spot on this rose I'm just removing the leaves from. So it's really important that you pick those up and you take those away. Right, let's move you back so you can see me and see whether we've got any questions on today's process. Right, it's back up to me. So always a little bit untidy when we do these. If anybody has a question, right, let's just catch up with these. So please excuse me while I stare blindly at the camera and just make sure. Someone joining me from Oxford. Hello, Harold, welcome along. Do you have any tender exotics? Yes, I do, Harold. Posted several videos about those over the last couple of days. I will show you very briefly. I have a couple of large bananas, which I've taken in for the winter. And if I move the camera ever so around, you'll see the house back there. You can see my 2 Australian and New Zealand tree ferns just over there. And I've got a couple of really large olives, one of which is there and one of them which is down by the pond. So yeah, I do have quite a lot of exotics. I've moved all of um, my succulents inside. They've gone into the greenhouse along with my large algarves. The only thing that's left outside is my yucca robusta. That's still outside. That will take down to about -15 as long as it stays dry. So yes, I do have several large amounts of succulents, quite large amounts of exotics which I've tucked away. Um, not a problem. So someone joining me from Minnesota, where it's going to be bitterly cold. You want to make sure that's Rosemary and Thyme joining me from Minnesota. You want to make sure that you head over to the main channel here on YouTube and watch the full winterization process, just in case there's anything you're unsure about. That involves piling up mulch or leaf mold or spent compost around the plant. Make sure you bury those canes a good 6 to 8 inches under a nice sort of molehill or gopher hill of compost or something, just to protect those lower stems and make sure you don't get frosted off right down to ground level. Then once you're through the worst of the winter weather in March and April, you can just peel back that mulch and do your winter pruning as you need to. Right. Someone saying that this is from hello from London. Growing roses, have learned a lot. That is an absolute pleasure. I'm glad you enjoy the content. No, someone saying it's asking whether this is the same process for climbers. No, if you do head over to the main part of the channel here and watch the winterization video I posted several weeks ago. With climbing roses, all we want to do at the moment, you can take back any really scraggly bits you know you're not going to want to actually cut back and prune in and tie in next year. Cut those away if you wanted to, but then most of it is actually tying in your growth. Get yourself a nice ball of Hessian twine. I prefer the Hessian twine because I really don't like using plastic cable ties or the plastic flexi ties at all in the garden. But get yourself some Hessian twine and just get those canes tied in. So whatever structure you're tying your climbing roses into, whether it's an arch or an arbor, pergola, or wiring system on the house, whatever it is, tie those canes in so they're safe and they're not whipping around in the wind. And then you can take your rose off of its structure come February, March, April. You can completely take it off its structure, you can prune it, and then you can put it back on. And again, I will be here to guide you through that process as and when we get to it. Obviously, we won't be doing it, and I'll be doing it a little bit ahead of schedule when I'm actually recommending it to you. So you can do it along live with me or follow one of my tutorials, and the information's all ready and waiting for you when you need it. Right, thank you very much to everybody that's joined me for your few questions today and for your comments. I will see you all again soon, but that is the very beginning of the winterization process, just to remove 1/3 of the excess growth at this stage. Cut it back, remove as much of the foliage you can if it is carrying pest and disease problems from this particular season, and make sure at this particular point in time you're removing any fallen leaves on the ground. Make sure that you're not carrying pest and disease forward to next year, especially if you're joining me from a growing zone below grown 7 or 8 and you're actually going to be heaping mulch up around the plant. What you don't want to be doing is burying those leaves under that protective mulch and carrying them over for next year. So as soon as the leaves have fallen, go around, and it's a bit, I say it's a bit OTT, but make sure you're picking them up and removing those. Those go off for incineration or for commercial recycling. Don't put them into your domestic compost bin. It simply won't get warm enough to cleanse them of the pathogens. And in a year's time or 2 years' time, whenever your compost is ready, you're going to add it back to the garden, unfortunately, reinfect your plants with black spot mold and mildew, which is something we don't want to be doing. We want to keep those out of the garden wherever possible. And again, that is one of the techniques, is keeping your your pruning secateurs clean, tidy, and sharp is another way of preventing an awful lot of problems you get in the garden with those issues. I'll see you all again very soon. Take good care now. Bye-bye.